I was halfway through installing a new security gate on my property when I saw her marching down the cul-de-sac like she owned the asphalt. Karen Stanford, president of the Oak Ridge Bluffs HOA and self-declared enforcer of neighborhood standards. She had the usual clipboard clutched in one hand, an iced latte in the other, and that look on her face like she was about to ruin someone's afternoon. "Jeremy Noland," she snapped before she even hit the edge of my driveway. "That gate is a violation of Section 14, Paragraph 2, subsection Karen." I cut her off, wiping my hands on a rag. "My house is outside the HOA jurisdiction, you know that." She didn't even blink. "It obstructs the neighborhood's visual uniformity, and I've had complaints." "From who? You and your split personalities," she narrowed her eyes. "It's not up for debate. Take it down or face consequences." I laughed, turned my back on her, and went back to work. I live on the edge of the neighborhood, technically not under their HOA, but Karen's been trying to rope me in for years. She hates that I don't pay dues, don't ask permission, and definitely don't give a damn about her newsletter. That evening, I was grilling in my backyard when I heard a knock at my front gate. I walked around and nearly choked on my beer. Two guys stood there in black polos with shiny badges that looked like they came from a Halloween store. One had aviators on at dusk. The other had a clipboard. "Mr. Noland," the clipboard guy said, "we're officers with the Oak Ridge Community Enforcement Division. We've had reports of unauthorized construction on this property." I stared at them. "Community? What? You guys are with the police?" Aviator guy puffed his chest. "We're authorized by the HOA to issue citations and enforce compliance." I laughed out loud. "You do realize impersonating law enforcement is a felony, right?" Clipboard guy went pale. Aviator guy didn't back down. "Sir, we're not impersonating, we're neighborhood compliance officers." "Hang on," I said, lifting my phone. "Let's clear this up right now." I called the county sheriff. Within 20 minutes, 2 real deputies rolled up. The fake cops immediately started backpedaling, throwing Karen's name around like it was a badge of honor. "She told us to do it," clipboard guy shouted as he was cuffed. "We thought it was legal." Karen showed up 5 minutes later, screeching in her Lexus like she was saving the day. "This is a misunderstanding," she shouted, heels clicking across my driveway. "They're volunteers." One of the deputies turned to her. "Ma'am, did you authorize these men to present themselves as law enforcement?" Karen hesitated. "I delegated community enforcement powers, yes." The deputy shook his head. "That's not a thing. You instructed civilians to impersonate officers." She tried to protest, but they read her rights right there on my driveway. I stood back, arms crossed, watching the whole circus unfold. My gate still standing, and Karen. She was about to find out real quick that HOA drama doesn't hold up in court. 2 days after Karen's impromptu arrest, I had a deputy's business card taped to my fridge, a pending witness statement scheduled with the county investigator, and a steady stream of neighbors slowing down near my driveway to gawk like they were passing a celebrity crime scene. That afternoon, I was tightening the bolts on the final section of the security gate when my neighbor, Mark, wandered over from across the street. He was in his usual oil-stained coveralls from the auto shop, carrying a thermos that always smelled faintly of diesel and burnt coffee. "You really kicked the hornet's nest this time," he said, watching me with a cautious grin. "Half the board's pretending they've never met Karen." "Funny," I said, setting my wrench down. "Didn't seem like they had any trouble electing her 3 times in a row." He shrugged. "They liked how she kept the lawns mowed and the fences painted. Now that she's sixing mall cops on people, they're all pretending they didn't vote." I motioned toward the gate. "You see anything wrong with this? Looks better than the chain-link garbage they approved for the corner lot." "But you know how they are. If it's not their idea, it's a problem." Before I could reply, a beige sedan stopped at the curb. A woman in a gray suit stepped out, holding a leather folio and moving with the kind of calm that screamed government issued. She approached with a polite nod. "Mr. Noland, I'm Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim. Do you have a moment?" Mark raised his brows, gave me a pat on the shoulder, and retreated to his garage like it was on fire. I gestured toward the porch. Coffee's fresh. What's the county's interest in this? Rachel followed me up the steps. Several, actually. We're investigating possible misuse of HOA funds to pay unlicensed individuals for enforcement activities. There are also allegations of document forgery, property harassment, and impersonating public officers. She opened the folio and slid over a copy of an email chain between Karen and the two arrested men. The subject line read, "Private Enforcement Protocols Confidential." "Where did you get these?" I asked, flipping through. "Anonymous tip, but we have reason to believe they were forwarded by a former board member. We're verifying the sender's identity." I read a few lines. Karen had directed the men to wear official-looking attire, maintain authority in tone, and document violations for billing purposes. One line stood out, "Make them comply or make them pay." I handed the paper back. She really thought she could manufacture a police force out of HOA fees. Rachel crossed one leg over the other. "We're also reviewing the HOA's financial records. There's a $12,000 line item labeled Community Protection Services that doesn't trace back to any registered business." I leaned back in my chair. "You think she was pocketing funds? We're not ruling it out." By the end of the meeting, I'd agreed to testify if the case went to court. Rachel left with a copy of my security footage showing the two men trying to issue their phony citation. I hadn't noticed before, but one of them had a visible earpiece like he thought he was in a spy movie. Later that night, I pulled up the HOA's community website, which still listed Karen as president. The forum page had exploded dozens of posts, most of them anonymous, calling for an emergency board vote. A few defended her, claiming she was only trying to keep standards high, but the overwhelming majority were furious. One post stood out. "If she used HOA money to pay those guys, I want my dues back. Every cent." Another, "She threatened to fine me for leaving my garbage can out for 10 minutes. Now she's hiring pretend cops." The next morning, I found a printed letter in my mailbox, hand-delivered. No envelope. It was a formal notice from the HOA's Vice President, Alan Merriweather. The letter read, "Dear resident, in light of recent events, the Oak Ridge Bluffs HOA Board has placed President Karen Stanford on administrative leave, pending an internal audit and legal review. Effective immediately, all enforcement actions are suspended. We urge residents to remain calm and respectful during this transition. The board will hold an emergency meeting Friday at 7 p.m. in the community center to discuss leadership changes and corrective measures." I chuckled. Administrative leave. Like she'd been caught padding invoices at a corporate job, not orchestrating a DIY Gestapo. Something still didn't sit right. Karen might have been impulsive and condescending, but this was coordinated. Those men knew what to say, how to act, and they had official-looking badges. One even had a laminated ID with the HOA logo and a fake badge number. That kind of effort didn't come from a weekend brainstorm. I reached out to a friend from my Army days, Marcus, who now worked as a private investigator. He owed me a favor from a few years back when I helped him out of a messy contractor dispute. I sent him the security footage, the emails, and the HOA letter. By Thursday, Marcus called me back. "Jeremy, those two guys, not just random idiots. One of them's a former private security guard who lost his license after an assault complaint. The other's got a sealed juvenile record, but I found a contract from a shell company registered in Wyoming. Guess who the registered agent is? Don't tell me it's Karen. Bingo. Same address as her brother's print shop in Millbrook. Looks like they were funneling money through fake invoices for consulting services. Rachel was going to love that. Friday arrived, and the community center parking lot was full before 6:30. I walked into a packed room. Folding chairs lined up in tight rows, neighbors fanning themselves with printed agendas, murmuring in every corner. Alan was sitting at the front table, looking like he hadn't slept all week. When he spotted me, he gave a stiff nod, less out of politeness and more because everyone now knew I was the guy who'd lit the fuse. Alan stood and tapped the mic. "Thank you all for coming. We'll begin with a brief overview of the current situation, followed by a Q&A. Before he could continue, a voice shouted from the back, "Where's Karen?" "She's been advised by counsel not to attend," Alan said, clearly rehearsed. A wave of jeers erupted. Alan waited it out, then gestured to the side wall where Rachel Kim now stood, accompanied by a county auditor and 2 deputies in uniform. Rachel stepped forward. "We're conducting an active investigation into financial misconduct, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, and criminal harassment. If you've received any unauthorized citations, notices, or demands for payment, please speak with us after the meeting." You could hear a pin drop. I spotted Mark near the snack table, holding a paper plate with 3 cookies and the expression of someone watching a high-speed train derail in real time. One by one, residents approached the mic, sharing stories of harassment, threats, and fines for things like unapproved mailbox flags and excessively decorative garden gnomes. A woman named Cheryl recounted how she'd been charged $50 for using a hose during a drought warning, even though it had rained the night before. By the end of the night, the board had voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. A temporary committee was formed to audit the last 5 years of expenses, and Rachel announced that the county would be filing formal charges within 2 weeks. As the crowd thinned out, Alan approached me. "I never thought it would go this far," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I looked him in the eye. "You gave her power and never asked what she was doing with it. That's how it got this far." He nodded, too tired to argue. Outside, I leaned against my truck, watching neighbors hug, shake hands, and maybe for the first time talk like they lived on the same street instead of under the same rulebook. The gate was still standing, but more importantly, so was the neighborhood. By Monday morning, I had a signed subpoena in my mailbox. It came sealed in a large manila envelope, delivered by a plainclothes officer who left without a word. Inside was a request for all security footage, documentation, and communications I had relating to the unauthorized enforcement activity carried out by Karen Stanford and her associates. The official seal of the county prosecutor's office was stamped on the bottom corner. I spent the next hour organizing everything onto a thumb drive. The footage, the emails Rachel had shown me, the HOA's printed threats, they all went into a folder I labeled Evidence, Injustice Edition. I dropped it off at the courthouse by lunchtime. The real storm began 2 days later. I was at the hardware store grabbing replacement slats for the side fence when my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "She's trying to move money," he said. "The account that paid the fake cops, it's almost empty." Someone made a withdrawal at 6:30 this morning from a bank downtown. Can that even be legal? Not with a pending investigation. Rachel's already on it. When I got home, a Channel 8 news van was parked across the street. Their reporter, a young guy with perfectly styled hair and a voice like he practiced every sentence twice, was interviewing a woman in a red windbreaker. I recognized her, Pam, who lived 2 houses down from the HOA clubhouse. She was holding up a printed notice she'd found on her door that morning, an invoice for a security review conducted 3 weeks prior. It demanded $85. The reporter turned toward the camera. Residents here are furious after discovering that the Homeowners Association may have attempted to bill them for services tied to a now criminal investigation. We've reached out to the HOA for comment but haven't received a response. I crossed my lawn and went inside, hoping to avoid the media circus. But 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was Alan. His shirt was wrinkled, his glasses fogged at the edges. "I need to show you something," he said, holding out a flash drive. "It's from the HOA's internal mail server. Someone forwarded it to me anonymously." I plugged it into my laptop and opened the only file on it, an audio recording, Karen's voice came through, clear and unfiltered. I don't care if they're not officially under our jurisdiction. They use our streets, they benefit from our upkeep, they owe us. If the county won't deputize us, we'll do it ourselves. Make them feel watched. Make them pay. I don't need permission to protect property values. Then another voice, quieter but unmistakably male. What about the legal risk? We use intermediaries. Keep the board out of it. I'll route the checks through the Community Events Fund. No one looks at that. People think it's for bounce houses. I paused the recording. Alan looked like someone had just dropped a live wire in his hands. You realize this is conspiracy to commit fraud, right? I said. I didn't know, he said, his voice tight. She kept that fund completely separate. Claimed it was reserved for emergency beautification. I uploaded the file and sent it to Rachel. Within minutes, she called back. We've got her, she said. We're requesting a warrant for wire fraud, misuse of organizational funds, and coercion under civil code. That recording confirms she knowingly misled the HOA board while using association funds for illegal activity. Will that be enough to charge her? There's more, she said. We've linked her to a second shell company registered in her sister's name. It's been billing the HOA for consulting for months. Total amount paid, over $27,000. I didn't respond right away. That was money pulled directly from residents' people who thought they were paying for landscaping and sidewalk repairs. That evening, a caravan of unmarked county vehicles pulled up to the HOA clubhouse. Officers moved in with methodical precision. I watched from my porch as they boxed up files, seized a desktop tower, and carried out several black binders labeled annual budget reports. A few neighbors stood at the edge of their lawns, whispering. No one seemed surprised anymore. The next morning, the district court issued a temporary injunction freezing all HOA financial activity pending a full audit. Residents were instructed not to pay dues until new oversight was in place. The emergency committee, now with 3 newly elected members, met under public supervision. For the first time in years, their meeting minutes were posted online in real time, but the real bombshell dropped 2 days later. Rachel called me personally. We found evidence that they attempted to access your property tax records, she said. Come again. Karen submitted a formal request to the county assessor's office under the name of a fictitious compliance officer. She claimed your property was non-conforming and potentially subject to reassessment under community zoning guidelines. She tried to get my taxes raised. She tried to trigger a reassessment that would flag your security gate as a non-compliant structure, which could have depreciated the property and forced you to apply for a variance which she would then deny. It was a long game, but it's all in writing. We have the forged request form signed with a fake title. I let out a low whistle. That's not just overreach, that's sabotage. She's being arraigned this Friday on multiple felonies. And based on the financials we've uncovered, the IRS wants a word with her too. There's unreported income, suspicious withdrawals, and a few donations to political campaigns that don't add up. Friday arrived fast. The courtroom was packed. A few reporters hovered near the back, typing into tablets. Karen sat at the defense table, her hair pulled back tight, a gray suit drowning her frame. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her lawyer, some white-haired guy with a thin mustache and a louder tie than voice, tried to argue procedural inconsistencies. The judge wasn't biting. The charges were read aloud. Conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonation of a public officer, misappropriation of funds, wire fraud, falsification of government documents, and attempted property manipulation. Karen didn't say a word. Bail was denied. When the hearing broke, Rachel motioned for me to follow her into the hallway. We're preparing civil suits for restitution, she said. You may be entitled to damages. The gate, the harassment, the attempted tax fraud, it all adds up. I'm not worried about the money, I said. I just want the neighborhood safe from people like her. You did more than that, she said. You helped expose a system that let people operate unchecked just because no one wanted to read the fine print. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. A few residents from Oak Ridge stood together, some still in work uniforms, others in weekend clothes. A woman I didn't recognize caught my eye and gave a nod of quiet respect. I nodded back. Over the next few weeks, the community began to change. The board began circulating surveys asking what residents actually wanted. They held open meetings in the park instead of the locked community room. The budget was posted on a shared drive. The HOA bylaws, once buried behind 4 clicks and a password, were printed and hand-delivered. One evening, Mark invited a few neighbors over for a barbecue. People brought folding chairs, kids ran barefoot through sprinklers, and no one talked about fines or violations. The only thing taped to anyone's door was a flyer for a block party. I stood near the grill, flipping burgers, when Alan wandered over with a soda in hand. "Hard to believe this used to be the quietest street in town," he said. "Quiet isn't always peaceful," I replied. He looked around at the crowd. "We've got a long way to go. But at least we're walking in the right direction." As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I glanced at the security gate. Still there, still locked. But now it wasn't just protecting my property. It was a reminder that when someone tries to take control without consent, the best defense isn't just a steel barrier. It's knowing the law better than they do, and refusing to back down. By the time the first week of Karen's detainment passed, the HOA's old guard had crumbled faster than anyone predicted. The Emergency Oversight Committee formed in the wake of the scandal had been given temporary control over all association decisions, but nobody really wanted the job. Most of the remaining board members had resigned in a panic once subpoenas started showing up with their names attached. For the first time in years, there was no one trying to monitor how high someone's grass grew or what color their porch lights were. The neighborhood felt looser, like someone had cut the strings on a marionette show everyone forgot they were part of. Still, not everything had settled. On a damp Thursday morning, I was working on re-leveling one side of the front patio when a black SUV pulled up and parked just outside the curb. 2 men stepped out, clean suits, no ties, the kind of people who always walked like they were on a tight schedule. One of them carried a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen more courtrooms than briefings. He introduced himself as Special Agent Lal Donovan from the state's Financial Crimes Division. His partner, Agent Ruiz, gave a nod and said nothing. "We need to speak with you about something we found during the audit," Donovan said. I led them inside. They didn't bother with coffee or small talk. Donovan opened the satchel and pulled out 3 stapled documents, each marked with an evidence tag and a state seal. These were recovered from a thumb drive hidden inside a false bottom drawer of the HOA's office, he said. "Encrypted, but we cracked it this morning." I scanned the first page. It wasn't a budget or a report. It was a contract, specifically a property lien authorization form, pre-filled with my name, my parcel number, and a signature that wasn't mine. "What is this?" I asked. "A fraudulent lien agreement. It was never filed officially, but it was clearly prepared. The plan was to record it through a third-party title company Karen's brother had access to. If it had gone through, it would have placed your property under financial encumbrance, giving the HOA leverage to demand compliance or force a sale under violation claims." I set the paper down slowly. "So this wasn't just about a gate?" "No," Donovan said. "It was a calculated effort to push out certain homeowners. We've identified 4 other properties with similar forms in draft. You were the pilot test." Ruiz finally spoke. "We believe the goal was to create a financial wedge. Make it impossible for you to refinance or sell without association approval. It's a tactic we've seen before in corporate land grabs, never in a residential HOA." I leaned forward. "So now what?" Donovan reached into the satchel again and handed me a court docket printout. "The state has added charges of attempted wire fraud, property tampering, and document forgery to the case against Karen and her co-conspirators. Her brother's been arrested. The title company's license is under revocation review. And we'd like you to testify as a victim of attempted property fraud. I gave a nod. I'll be there. That afternoon, I received a call from a man named Ellis Tran, a litigator representing a group of homeowners who decided to file a class-action civil lawsuit against the HOA. For years, residents had been fined, harassed, and manipulated into paying for phantom services, all while the board quietly funneled money into side ventures and fake contracts. Now, with everything exposed, there was finally legal traction. We're bringing this civil suit parallel to the state's criminal case, Ellis explained. This isn't just about restitution. We're seeking punitive damages, and we'd like you to serve as a representative plaintiff. The next week was a blur of depositions, affidavits, and witness statements. Nearly 24 residents came forward with stories that painted a consistent picture. Karen's regime had evolved from overzealous rule enforcement into an organized racket. People had been threatened with foreclosure for minor infractions. Some were charged for repairs that never happened, and one elderly woman had been coerced into signing over access to her backyard under the pretense of a community easement project. Rachel, the ADA, pulled me aside during one of the court prep sessions. Most of these people didn't speak up until now because they didn't know what their rights were, she said. You standing up set off a chain reaction. This whole case, it started with that security gate and a sheriff's call. I shook my head. I never thought it'd go this deep. It always does, she replied. When people start treating power like a personal asset instead of a responsibility, things rot from the inside. The criminal trial began 3 weeks later in a packed downtown courtroom. Karen pled not guilty to all charges through her attorney, who looked like someone who charged by the syllable. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fake invoice trail, the forged documents, the impersonations, the wire transfers, they had built a case so airtight even the jury barely blinked when the prosecution laid it all out. I took the stand on the third day. I recounted the day the fake cops showed up at my gate, the forged lien papers, the audio recordings, and the pattern of targeted harassment that followed. The defense tried to discredit me by pointing out that my property wasn't technically under the HOA, but that only made things worse for them. So you're saying the defendant attempted to impose jurisdiction where none existed? The judge asked, peering over his glasses. The defense attorney stammered. Merely that there was confusion over boundaries, the judge cut him off. There's no confusion in the law. There's only what's written and what's not. Move on. By the end of the second week, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 12 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 8. Her brother received 5 years for his role in defrauding the community through the title company. Several ex-board members took plea deals in exchange for testimony, and the Financial Restitution Fund was set up, with over $100,000 recovered from seized accounts and assets. The civil case settled soon after. Each participating homeowner received a payout based on the severity of the damages sustained. Some got enough to cover years of wrongful fines. Others used the money to renovate or fix things the HOA had neglected. I donated a portion of mine to a local legal clinic that helped homeowners fight abusive associations. The Oak Ridge Bluffs HOA didn't dissolve entirely, but it was rebuilt from the ground up. A new charter was created, limiting board authority and requiring public votes for any financial decisions over a certain threshold. The bylaws were rewritten with input from residents, and a third-party compliance monitor was brought in to oversee operations for the next 3 years. At the first meeting under the new structure, I stayed quiet. I sat near the back, arms crossed, listening as neighbors discussed landscaping schedules and mailbox repairs without fear of retaliation. The atmosphere had changed entirely. People spoke openly, laughed, disagreed without hostility. After the meeting, a young couple I hadn't met before approached me. They just moved into the neighborhood the week prior. The husband extended his hand. "You're the reason we bought here," he said. "We heard what you did. Figured if someone like you lives here, it's a good place to raise our kid." I shook his hand. "Appreciate that. Just make sure you read the bylaws first." As I walked home, the familiar creak of my gate greeted me. I paused, rested a hand on it for a moment. It wasn't just steel and hinges anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes, standing your ground isn't about fighting. It's about making things right so no one else has to. From that day forward, nobody looked at that gate as a point of defiance. They saw it for what it was. The line that finally stopped them,